Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Valley of Walls. First off, I'd like to thank Apex Art for their support in making this exhibition happen. It really wouldn't have been without them that we've been able to install and to share it with to share this idea with not just the people in Cairo, but an audience abroad as well. Before we begin, I'd also like to give a special thanks to the artists. They welcomed me into their project. This is a project that they've been working on for almost 2 years now, actually more than 2 years now. And as I joined them, it was like being welcomed into a new family. And I see the show as just a culmination of their brilliant ideas, and I look forward to many more people witnessing the passion and the effort that it took to bring it to life. So the Valley of Walls is a result of a conversation between three different entities. On one hand, you have the artists and their artworks. That's one entity. On the other hand, you have the abandoned apartment itself, where the exhibition is actually happening, but where also much of the work and the brainstorming and the trials took place. And the third component was the archive that belonged to Ahmed Ali Kamel, who in one way or another is actually the person that brought us all together. Ahmed Ali Kamel was a minister of irrigation in the 1970s. And actually, when we go inside of his office, we can discover a little bit more of what his life was like and what his accomplishments were like, his accomplishments were all about, and what actually composed his interests in his life. So if we move forward into what used to be his office, and if we look around, we'll see that he was a prolific a reader, a brilliant engineer of some sort. And he's someone who started off in the ministry ever since he graduated up until he became minister. Even afterwards, he was still in the ministry. So we're talking about someone who spent probably 70 years as an Egyptian bureaucrat. His interests, and as we look around in the just looking at the names of the books, we see that obviously he had a passion for engineering, but there's also a different relationship just by looking at the titles of his books that we can see become established between him and the Nile Valley. So he's someone who paid attention to the question of preserving nature, and this very, very early on. He was attached to this discourse even in the 1940s and the 1950s. And this is something that we talk about today here in Egypt, what it means to preserve the Nile, but he was sort of an avant-garde in that sense. And then there's also a third layer in this archive, and it's his attachment and his interest in books about values and morals and ethics in general. And when it came to bringing together the artists and the archive and the abandoned apartment, the initial question for me was, how do you make sure that the artist's intervention within the apartment would itself be ecological in quality, would sort of be respectful of the new environment that it was entering, and in what way could these interventions be qualified as ethical? And that was sort of the prompt that the five of us, the artists and myself, were kind of discussing all the time. How do you let the apartment lead, all whilst creating an art exhibition? And I think that what united us all in our efforts to make this exhibition happen was a tendency to listen to the apartment. It was never about imposing our own points of views as much as making the artworks be a reflection of that conversation. And I think that speaks to all the mediums that you're going to see in this exhibition. Most of them are site-specific installations or installations, but in any case, they reflect on an understanding of the space that surrounds them, and an understanding that that space needs to be, that you need to collaborate with that space. And that the artist's role when he or she is sort of thinking about their artworks is really to bring out the various features of this apartment that's been abandoned for 22 years. When you think of an apartment that's been abandoned for 22 years, you'll see lots of unknowns. You'll see lots of things that are not understandable. And maybe that's one of the first things that welcome us in terms of artworks when we move out of the office and go into the main reception area. The first thing that the audience sees or are welcomed by is obviously the vast space that you see around you. The apartment, even though abandoned, it still had a unique sort of charisma of its own. It had a personality of its own, and that personality was best captured by Al-Maghrabi's work. Muhammad Al-Maghrabi is an engineer and is an architect, but he was very interested in one component from Ahmad Ali Kamal's archive, and these were the technical drawings pertaining to dams and barrages. And in one of his in all three of his artworks, he gives us an interpretation of the high dam as sort of a creature of its own, as an environment of its own that lives inside of this apartment. So if you scan the QR code, you'll see a phantasmagoria of some sense. This augmented reality is an interpretation of the high dam as an ecological and a living being in and of itself. So it's no longer the high dam that lives off or that exists miles and miles away from Cairo and only distributes water. Al-Maghrabi imagines it as an organism, as having a life, of having a being and a life of its own. And I think we were constantly joking around while working, and whenever something went wrong, we would kind of blame it on him. So he's kind of like the ghost that kept the space alive. And he is an unknown that animates the space, and he gives the viewer kind of he gives the viewer the first impression that maybe we're not entering a normal apartment. Maybe there's something special about this location. And right when we as we turn on our right, no, sorry, the left, apologies. I thought I was in the space itself. On the left, you'll see something through the glass. And I think it takes about a minute or so to understand what it is that we're actually looking at. This is, in Egypt, this is particularly known as the salon. And in this salon, we have sofas, we have chairs, we have the vases, we have the frames. So everything seems kind of normal. When we first came inside the apartment, lots of things were covered up. And Hani Rashid, the artist of this piece, Sweetness of the Unknown, was struck by how the furniture was covered. These rooms in Egypt are usually covered up because we save them for the guests that come once or twice a year, but then they're usually not really used by the people living in the house. And struck by this idea of preservation, Hani decided to actually wrap up everything in plastic as if it was being preserved for the future, as if it was being preserved for a timeline that is kind of unknown in and of itself. And what we did with the curation of the show is we actually decided to keep this room closed. So the room itself becomes its own unknown, even though it is a room that we are all kind of familiar with. But by keeping it locked up and only accessible through this layer of glass, we're inviting people to reconsider something that was very material, something that was very tangible, and it becomes its own immaterial and its own intangible. And in that sense, kind of the ghost that you saw in Maghrabi's work and the salon are kind of in conversation with one another. And even the chandelier, if you try to zoom, if you try as you may, but you'll never really be able to see it. The chandelier itself kind of resembles the ghost that Al-Maghrabi was interpreting. Now, if we step back outside into the main area, we'll encounter another one of Hani Roshid's pieces. I'll just make a small note that it is intentional that this exhibition doesn't really have a clear pathway, because we're inviting people to enjoy getting lost in the space, to enjoy things being even more unknown to them. So it's not about it's not about knowing exactly where it is that you are, as much as it's just appreciating the space for its own unique qualities, rather than for the perceptions that we might be projecting onto it. So back to the artworks. So right now we're in front of Hani Roshid's Land of Hypocrisy. From far, we could all probably assume that this is kind of an archive about irrigation. You have plants, you have seeds, you have soil, you have dirt, you have rocks, you have liquids. Except that if you look a little bit closer and you actually read the labels, every one of those labels is actually names as morals or values that Ahmad Ali Kamel was reading about, and these are the values and morals that Hani found in the library or in the archive room. So there is kind of a subversion that's happening. So obviously, Hani is kind of borrowing from what we know as archive-based art, the sense that an artwork could sort of directly reflect on an archive, except that by mislabeling or at least playing around with what we might expect, he's also intervening and subverting he's intervening within the archive and kind of subverting it, because it's no longer about a question of correctly representing what we know, but it is adding a different layer. So he's bringing together two of Ahmad Ali Kamel's interests into one piece. And what it kind of does is that it brews up a little bit the viewer's curiosity, because then you start asking yourself questions. And these are exactly the type of questions that we want the audience to engage with in the space, because they're dealing with something that is unknown to them. So naturally, the unknown brings up our own curiosities, brings up even more questions. And now we enter into another area in the exhibition, and we see Nada Baraka's A Carnival to My Ears. Nada Baraka is actually Ahmad Ali Kamel's granddaughter. So she holds a different relationship to the exhibition space than the rest of the artists and myself. She knows it through her memories. She knows it through different associations, having witnessed the space through a different past. And I think that this is something that she brings up, or that she activates in the space, because what she brings in all three of her works is a sense of theatricality. And it's a theatricality that mimics very well even the grandeur of the space. So the apartment was actually built, the building itself was built over 100 years ago. So you have really high ceilings. This is very much a grandiose setting. And in this piece, she responds to that, not only with the size, obviously, of the artworks, but also with what she's doing. So the theatricality that she introduces in her works kind of stems from the fact that all of the objects or the details that we find in the paintings all reflect, most of them at least, reflect objects inside of the apartment. So it's kind of like objects that have always been there gain a life of their own. Either a porcelain of a flower porcelain becomes this gigantic mythical creature in one of her paintings. A glass object kind of becomes a central focus in another one of the paintings, and you sort of get to see that what Nada is trying to communicate to us is that things sort of have a life of their own. It's no longer about who says who defines an object, as much as it's the object that just speaks for themselves now. And she uses painting, I think, brilliantly, because only the medium of painting can kind of allow an artist to take liberty in these explorations. Moving further, we're going to pass by things that we know back to the unknown as we go into a hallway. Exactly. So this hallway or vestibule is where we encounter Malak Yaout's living spaces of murmur, another man's flood. So Ahmed Ali Kamel, as a minister, as an engineer of irrigation, he was kind of focusing on three main things. He had reports about groundwater, he had reports about flooding and drainage, and he had reports about drainage and floods. But when it came to many of the things related to drainage and floods, there were many missing points in the archive. And Malak decided to intervene and to kind of fill that gap. So one of the works that she was mostly interested in was a film about flood. What we know is that it was about flood, except that the film itself was kind of destroyed due to bad preservation. We don't know what the film says. We don't know what the film is about. And she decides to make her work into a film that is unknown, a flood that we don't know, that we can't really understand. And so what we see in white are the title cards that we were able to read in the first few frames. And then in red are her own interventions. She's speculating about, well, what could this flood be about? What could this what could the repercussions of flooding and draining kind of say about a larger status quo that relates to the Nile? And the piece itself is located in a vestibule or in a really small hallway in the apartment. And the hallway is in and of itself a liminal space or a gap inside of the larger floor plan. So Malak is literally filling the gap in the apartment through her questions and through these speculations. So not only is it an intervention within the archive and within the apartment, but it's a very critical one because it takes us, it exemplifies and also amplifies what it is that we don't know about the Nile. Moving on to the kitchen. The kitchen is where we encounter the second of Nada Baraka's works, entitled An Epoch of Grace. So the kitchen is in any room, in any household, the kitchen is a very familiar place. It's where we go almost, if not once or twice a day. I mean, for myself, I go a lot to the kitchen. So it's a space that we don't really imagine to be disturbed or to be made unknown, except that this is exactly what Nada Baraka plays on. She turns a space that is very familiar, a space that is a locus in. I mean, there is a central focus in any apartment or in any house in general, into something that becomes also a starting point for a larger conversation. Except that the things that are going to lead these conversations are the abandoned objects in the kitchen. She brings together her own drawings with the things that were left aside. So the pans, the cutlery, the pots, the oven, the stove, everything that was left in the kitchen, she brings into conversation with her drawings. That gives these objects a different role. They no longer function as the objects that we use, but they also gain a life of their own. I think in the kitchen, this is really, you could think of Beauty and the Beast, when everything is coming to life and everything is somewhat enchanted, and is very vibrant. And her drawings help us associate the vibrancy to the kitchen, but then also her drawings are do something else. So the archival components that she was attracted to were her grandfather's notes. We all have a tendency to kind of like scribble phone numbers or small ideas onto papers that we don't really organize, but that we can all find in most of our bags, our pockets, etc. She assembled those, and she introduced them into the kitchen, and she added a layer, the layer of her own drawings. And so in that sense, she's in direct conversation with her grandfather. And what is interesting is that Nada was able to assimilate the structure of the kitchen to the structure of her own drawings. So Nada's drawings are known to have sort of like a fourth dimensional geometry, where she introduces space in a very interesting way. And I think that what she does with the kitchen and how she assembled the objects inside of this crooked place in a way is kind of a reflection of how it is that she approaches drawing. So the shading on the floor, the lighting and everything, these were all, these come and dialogue with the new space that she's created and help enhance sort of the life of the objects that she's conversing with. And then we move out and we go to a second half of the apartment. So during the curation of the exhibition, I kind of noticed that the apartment has almost 9 rooms, and all of those rooms have a storage component of their own. So this kind of made me understand something about also the process with which the artists were working for the first half of the project, is that it was all about trying to classify and to understand what this apartment was actually about. And so the first half of the apartment, this is really when the exhibition kind of talks about the spatiality, not only of the space, but also of the artworks, and kind of pays homage to how it is that the apartment has a life of its own, and that the space is one reflection of that life. And then only in the second half of the apartment is when we talk about archiving as a performative practice, something that the artist embodied and made dialogue with their works. I think, as I was saying in the beginning, this exhibition was all about listening to the space and collaborating with the space as its own environment. And actually, when we were working, we had, I think, 3 doves came and nested inside of the apartment. We had a broken window, and so they came through it. We had a balcony, and they nested there. So in the bathroom, through the broken window, a bird came and she laid a nest, and in the nest she laid 2 eggs. She built her nest and she laid 2 eggs. The eggs remained, and we decided to kind of keep them in the apartment as a testament to that collaboration. And so just as there were some spaces that were completely modified by the artist, like Nada's kitchen, other places that are closed off, like Hani's salon, this room is really the apartment's, it really belongs to the apartment. There were no artistic interventions. Everything was kept as is. And it even became a starting point for one artist's way of thinking about her artworks. So if we move into the bedroom, we encounter Malak Yaoud's second work, Living Spaces of Murmur, 1001 Voices. This piece is a sound installation. Is it installation with sound? Pardon. In the installation, for this installation, she was inspired by reports related to underground water, except that to contextualize them within this valley of walls, within the apartment, she decided to reinterpret the report through the lens of the creatures that we came across in the apartment. So in the apartment, because it's been abandoned for so long, we had geckos, we had rats, we had doves. And so she reinterpreted a statistical report through these creatures' point of view. And so in the sound installation, we hear the murmurs of the various creatures that lived in the apartment, but we also see them interrupt the archive itself. So we can read the report on the glass in the bedroom. We can see interruptions through handwritten features. We can see the interruptions by through the rupture itself of the photograph. So this lack of clarity when we come to read or try to read this report is actually a reflection of the various voices that are speaking in this archive. Obviously here when we did the scan, it was in the morning, but in the evening, the room feels very scary because we only have these two really small sources of light. And you hear the murmurs. So we've heard from a lot of people that this room is actually scary. Moving on to the next room. Here we encounter Nada Baraka's third work, Occult. As I said in the beginning, the exhibition is a layer that was added onto a project that took 2 years. When the artists first came, they decided that they would gather all the frames in the apartment in this room. And so the room, as a starting point, kind of felt like a cabinet d'amateur. A cabinet d'amateur is, in art history, it reflects on those, paintings where you have one giant room with 100 different paintings inside of it. And when I first came, at least to the project, this is what this room kind of always reminded me of. It felt like a cabinet d'amateur. And what Nada Baraka does with her installation is dialogue with that, with something that was already existing when she began to work, and she added to it her grandfather's almost literal cabinet d'amateur. So in French, cabinet d'amateur means an amateur's cabinet or a collector's cabinet, and she really gives us a materialization of that cabinet. It's almost as if we are seeing a cabinet d'amateur in front of us. She gathers mostly things from the archive related to her grandfather's travels. And obviously, as a minister, Ahmed Ali Kevin traveled lengthily in the 60s and the 70s. And he would always come back with something, either ideas or letters or photographs, his own photographs. And so Nada assembles all of those into an installation that dialogues not just with the archive, but also with this room. And it's as if we're literally standing in front of a cabinet d'amateur. Maybe what I'll say one thing before we move out of the room is that since we're in this half of the apartment, you'll notice that cabinets are the ones actually that are this practice of classifying and its relationship to cabinets is what brings the artworks together. So in Malak's room, she uses the existing closet as a locus for one of her artworks, and then here Nada reflects back on the practice of archiving and classifying to make cabinet d'amateur actually happen. Moving on to the next room. So similarly as with the previous room, in this room, it was decided by all the artists that they would bring together all the cabinets in the house. And so the room kind of started to look like a cabinet of curiosities. And this when we were thinking together about what was going to happen to this room, we decided, well, why not actually make it into a cabinet of curiosity. And this is where El-Maghrabi was kind of considering bringing another element of the phantasmagoria, exploring another element of phantasmagoria that we saw through the QR code. But here he's interpreting this creature through this curious creature through a drawing. What we see, the central cabinet in the center holds one of al-Maghrabi's drawing, which is he reinterprets a technical drawing of the high dam, except that he's putting it in a cabinet that functions as its own technology. So this cabinet was designed for Ahmed Ali Kemal towards the end of his life. This is where he stored his computer, and attached to his computer was a viewing mechanism that would allow him to enlarge papers, to enlarge drawings, or to enlarge any documents. And inspired by that enlargement, al-Maghrabi decided to sort of render technical his own drawing. And he designed, especially for this drawing, a cabinet where you could peer through with the lenses, and you would see an augmentation of that drawing. I invite you afterwards to actually look at the Apex Art website to see the drawing itself. And in response to that, the room itself kind of has its own enlargement mechanism. And so what you see here is through the glass, hinting at Alice with the Looking Glass and all the curiosities in Alice in Wonderland, is a curiosity of its own. So this room actually holds two different curiosities. You have al-Maghrabi's Phantasmagoria, which we actually see, we get to explore and dissect almost as if it's a body with its own physiology. And then here as well, you get to peer through a curious location without really knowing where you are and what you're looking at. And then we move out of the room onto the hallway again. The hallways play an important role in the exhibition because they allow us to reflect on the emptiness of the walls. It was a clear decision when we were considering what we were going to do in the exhibition to leave the walls empty. Not only is the exhibition literally a valley of walls, but also because it makes the apartment take the lead. It makes the apartment take center stage in the exploration of the archive and how the artwork's also being displayed. And it makes sure that the apartment always has a voice of its own. So here we're in the storage room. Like I said before, there is not one area in the second half of the apartment without its own storage components. And here in the storage room, we encounter two different interpretations, two ways of intervening within the archive. What we see in front of us, again, is the third of al-Maghrabi's artworks. This is a video animation called Facticities of an Unknown Instrument. Like I said in the beginning, al-Maghrabi is interested in exploring the life of the high dam. And here, obviously, the medium of animation is very helpful for that. We see in front of us 3 screens, and every screen is dedicated to one different component of this life. In one of them, and what we see in front of us right now, is the topological aspect of the high dam. In another one, he explores the biological aspect, and in the third one, he explores the mechanical aspect. So this unknown, which is the high, for Maghrabi, the high dam is an unknown. It's kind of being explored through different perspectives, but all while knowing that these perspectives will never give us the full picture. Environment is understanding the limits of our own understanding, and respecting and sort of cherishing the unknown in the things that we encounter. So right now, what we see in front of us is the mechanical aspect of the high dam. But the mechanical quickly turns into the organic or the biological, as we see the these feather-like aspects merging with the mechanical in a way. In the evening, this room is actually almost dark, and so you go walk in and you have these, 3 black screens with the features coming out. It's really amazing. One thing that also we might not notice at the same time, and this is what makes it very powerful, is the marble on the floor. And this is Malak Yaout's third artwork. If you notice, when you walk in, if you notice the floor underneath you is not stable, and some things seem to be embossed, some things seem to be carved, and it looks from afar like it is a normal marble flooring, but then you start asking yourself, well, why does it have any lettering on it? So what brings together the 3 of Malak's works is constantly this practice of intervening. And how do you intervene and interrupt an archive? So if in the first iteration, she was speculating about the archive and trying to fill a gap, in the second one, she is fictionalizing that gap by imagining the different creatures. And here, I think in this piece, she respects, or she directly fragments the archive. The letters that we see actually pertain to sentences from one entire report about barrages and dams that were being built in the 1960s. Except that this report had various various mistakes. And obviously, on a typewriter, these mistakes are corrected either by hand, or the document passes again, and but you can see that something comes to replace something else. And so if spelling mistakes or if mistakes in general were their own interruption of the archive, they interrupt the readability of the archive, Malak decides to make this the central feature of her work. So she decides to literally interrupt our own reading of that archive. So you can, because of the chevron shape of the flooring, you can't read the sentences till the end. And actually throughout the exhibition, she also moves some of those slabs, further enhancing or further materializing the fragmentation of the archive. And I think in that sense, she highlights a tension in the conversation between the apartment and the archive, because if our assumption, and this was kind of visually clear in the archive room, so the archive room is nicely lit, you can spend an hour there and be able, and you have access to sort of lots of things. Through Malak's works, this is when you come to see that maybe the archive is not maybe the archive is not in and of itself a guarantee to truth or a guarantee to clarity. And in each of her works, she kind of builds on those layers. One of the last works that we see in the apartment is Henny Rashid's And Things Return to Normal. Like I said before, the artists, each one of them kind of collaborated with the apartment, and a lot of them decided to work with what they found or how they found things. And this was the state of the apartment when the artist first came in. There was rubble, it was all broken, and it really didn't change much from that. Except for one thing, the really small figures that you see on the floor. These are aluminium figures that show that are drawings of people working along, that are people working. Let me stop with that. Henny was inspired by a photograph, an archival photograph that showed workers along the Nile. And so he directly transposed that onto the floor of the bathroom again in a very theatrical way. And it's almost as if he's building a maquette, a theatrical maquette. And he's asking us to suspend our disbelief and to imagine that this is actually a scene with the workers coming in. And in the exhibition space, there's actually the sound of a motor playing. So you really do feel, you really do suspend your disbelief, and you just imagine that this is an irrigation site and not a bathroom. And the last stop in the exhibition is a closed door. No one knows what lies behind that door, and the room kind of stands as a rebuke to the archive room. So if the archive laid everything bare, this room stands for the unknown, and it is what kind of it is one way for the apartment to speak back, sort of about what it is that is allowed for us as viewers, or even as artists or as participants, and what is not. And it is the apartment's way of saying, you know, these are the limits to man's, or to art's intervention. And it kind of speaks back to it speaks back to the relationship between, on the one hand, the aesthetics that was brought forward by the art, but also the ethics that the apartment kind of asks for. And it's this entanglement between art and ethics, and also between theatricality and curiosity, that kind of makes the Valley of Walls into the exhibition that that I hope you enjoyed. Thank you all for listening to us, and I'm open to all your questions. I hope that you'll come back and kind of look more in detail as to what actually came to fill up that space. There's lots that the scan kind of covers, and yeah, you can wander through the Valley of Walls. Can you elaborate more on the choice of the title of the exhibition? So at first it was, I think we were looking for something that would have been kind of poetic, something that would bring together what Ahmed Ali Kamal's main interest and main work was about. So hence the valley side, the Valley of the Nile, but then also doing justice to the apartment itself. So I think it was Nada Baraka who first suggested the walls of the valley, and then afterwards I suggested the Valley of Walls, because I think when we were working, this is when we started working together on the exhibition, this is when it started to become clear that the exhibition was really about the apartment. And sort of to make this clear, we went for the Valley of Walls.
I have a question for Ida.
Yes.
I'm just wondering how this became possible. How did you or the artists sort of know about the existence of this apartment? Sort of what circumstances allowed you to sort of think that an exhibition was possible in it? Yeah, it seems like there's a story there.
Yeah, and a very important story. This, like I said before, this Nada Baraka is Ahmed Ali Kamal's granddaughter. So the apartment still remains within the family, and she's been for the past few years interested in doing something with his archive. And then she gathered us all, basically, and it was from there that the work happened. And I think it was very natural and intuitive to kind of host the exhibition inside of the apartment. I think it was Nada's way of also reflecting on or at least speaking to a frustration that exists in Egypt with the lack of places where art exhibitions actually happen. and of, just saying that maybe art outside of commercial space, art outside of commercial galleries and institutions was and is still possible.
And how did you particularly get involved, and the particular artists? What what was the coming together there?
Yeah. So I think it first started with Nada. Nada called Hani, and then Nada called came in touch with Al-Maghrabi and Malak, and then Hani by chance also came in touch with me. So it's very organic, I think. And the five of us kind of work as a collective, but I feel very grateful to Nada for actually for taking this for bringing us all together. How was the exhibition received by his family members? They were very happy. It was important to me, at least as a curator, to kind of thank them for allowing us to use his apartment. When they came, there was a lot of nostalgia and reminiscing about, oh, we used to do this here, we used to do this there, and that itself was very interesting to listen to, because it's a layer that I was very I wanted to make sure that the exhibition wouldn't become nostalgic, because this is about looking at the apartment as a space, almost like a hyper object. And a hyper object, I'm kind of thinking of Timothy Morton's and Graham Harman's ideas about things being almost more important than, or not things being more important than subjects, but the subject and the object kind of being on the same level. So it was very important for me that people don't come to the apartment thinking, oh, my grandmother has the same thing. And so when they came and they started talking, because of their attachment to the place, and they started talking about that, it was really heartwarming moment. Yes, we have had people from non-art scene come and see the show. I think because we offer, no, we don't offer, but I mean, because it has to do with an archive about something that touches us all, the archive of the Nile in general. So we have had people from outside. We've had lots of students bring in their parents with them, which is interesting to see. But I've had a few art students who came back with their parents. Not sure what that means, but it's good.
Can I ask another question? I'm kind of wondering how this fits into the larger kind of relationship that maybe Egypt has to archives. And I know that in certain countries, archives can be kind of even access to archives can become kind of a political question, or archives that are technically available, but bureaucracy can kind of do magical things to them, or
Yes.
What is in an archive and what is not in an archive. So yeah, I'm wondering how does that factor into your exhibit?
So I think you are correct. Egypt is one of the places where archives are not as accessible, and there are a lot of unknowns about Egypt's archives. And I mean, I think in our case, we were mostly interested in the practice of archiving and what comes out of it, like classifying, storing, ordering, or just trying to understand what practices compose the archive rather than the archive itself, and making the artworks kind of dialogue with those practices, because I think none of us five are able to access the archive from a historical perspective or from an engineer's perspective. And I didn't want that to be a point that would, I mean, I wanted to turn this relationship to the archive that we had into its own strong point, rather than making the exhibition about the archive itself, because I think that would have necessitated a completely different conversation. And that would have been a conversation that you could have had outside of the apartment. I think the whole aim of the exhibition is to contextualize the archive within the apartment, and to make the apartment take the lead, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Are there any other questions for Farida? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for attending this tour. Thank you both to Farida again and the artists for putting together this exhibition. I really wish I could see this exhibit. I'm sort of sad to be sitting in New York right now, but I think it's been sort of a really special. It's been nice to have a personal tour, which about sort of as in the exhibit as you can get, barring actually being there. Okay, thank you so much, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.